Every Thursday at exactly 6:15 p.m., Daniel Harper walked into the same small cafe in downtown Seattle with the quiet determination of a man holding on to something fragile. The bell above the glass door chimed softly as he stepped inside, shaking the rain from his jacket, breathing in the warm scent of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. He always chose the table by the window, the one with the faint scratch across the wooden surface and the clear view of the street where umbrellas moved like slow black flowers in the rain. He told himself he liked the view, that he liked watching the city slow down after work, but the truth sat heavier in his chest. He was waiting for her. 3 months earlier, on a stormy evening when the sky had looked bruised and restless, she had rushed into the cafe, slightly out of breath, her navy coat damp at the edges, strands of brown hair clinging to her cheek. She had paused, scanning the crowded room, until her eyes landed on his table. "Is this seat taken?" she had asked, her voice soft but steady. Daniel had looked up from his laptop, surprised by the sudden brightness she carried despite the weather. "No," he had replied, closing the screen without thinking. That simple word had changed the rhythm of his weeks. Her name was Emily Dawson. She worked in marketing for a small design company, loved old novels, disliked olives, and dreamed of seeing the northern lights at least once in her life. He learned these details slowly, across shared Thursdays that felt unplanned but strangely meant to be. They never scheduled the meetings, they just happened. One week she waved when she saw him. The next week he saved the seat before she arrived. Soon, it became their unspoken routine. Daniel would finish work early, loosen his tie, and arrive first. Emily would appear minutes later, sometimes smiling, sometimes thoughtful, always carrying stories from her week. They talked about everything that felt safe yet important: office frustrations, childhood memories, favorite movies, family traditions during Christmas. She laughed easily, the kind of laugh that made other people glance over and smile without knowing why. He listened closely, asking questions that showed he cared. Somewhere between coffee refills and fading daylight, they built something that had no label but felt real. Daniel had not expected to feel this way at 29. He had dated before, had tried serious relationships, had told himself he was too busy building his career to think deeply about love. Yet with Emily, nothing felt forced. There was no pressure, no drama, no confusion. Just a calm understanding that settled between them like quiet music. He found himself looking forward to Thursdays more than anything else. Meetings felt shorter. Traffic felt lighter. Even the gray Seattle sky seemed softer on those evenings. But tonight, as he sat at their table watching raindrops slide down the window in uneven lines, something restless moved inside him. She was late. Emily was rarely late. He checked his phone once, then again, telling himself not to overthink. The cafe hummed with low conversations and the soft hiss of steaming milk. A couple near the counter argued gently about which dessert to share. A group of students laughed over a board game. Life moved normally around him, yet his chest felt tight. He replayed their last conversation in his mind. She had seemed distracted, staring out the window longer than usual, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. When he asked if she was okay, she smiled and said she was just tired. But he knew the difference between tired and distant. Daniel was not a dramatic man, but he understood small changes. He understood pauses. He understood when someone carried news they had not yet spoken. He tried to focus on the street outside, on the way headlights reflected on wet pavement, but his thoughts kept circling back to her. When the cafe door finally opened and a gust of cold air swept in, his heart reacted before his eyes confirmed it. Emily stepped inside, brushing rain from her shoulders, scanning the room until she found him. For a second, relief washed over him so strongly he almost laughed. She was here. But as she walked toward the table, he noticed something in her expression, less light, more weight. She smiled, but it did not fully reach her eyes. Daniel stood slightly, a small habit he had developed without realizing, and she sat down across from him, close enough that he could see the faint worry line on her forehead. "Sorry I'm late," she said quietly. He shook his head, telling her it was fine, but his instincts told him this Thursday would not be like the others. Outside, the rain fell harder, tapping urgently against the glass as if urging time forward. Daniel felt the fragile shape of their routine tremble beneath the surface. He had never asked for promises, never asked what they were or where this might lead. He had been content living week to week, conversation to conversation. But sitting there, watching her wrap her hands around the warm cup the barista placed in front of her, he realized how much he had quietly invested in these evenings. He realized that Maple Street, 6:15 p.m., and the table by the window had become more than a habit. They had become hope. And hope, he understood in that moment, is a beautiful but dangerous thing when you are not sure if the other person feels it too. Emily held her cup with both hands as if the warmth could steady her thoughts, and Daniel noticed how quiet she had become, how the usual spark in her eyes seemed dimmed by something heavier than a long workday. He asked about her week, trying to keep his voice light, but she didn't answer right away, instead watching the rain race down the window before finally saying his name in a tone that made his chest tighten. "Daniel, I got the job offer," and for a split second he felt proud because he remembered how hard she had worked, how she stayed late at the office, how she doubted herself before big presentations, and he forced a smile, telling her that was amazing, that she deserved it. But then she added, almost in a whisper, "It's in Toronto." And the word landed between them like a quiet storm. Toronto meant distance, new streets, new routines, new people who would get her Thursdays instead of him, and he felt the future shift without asking his permission, yet he kept his posture calm, nodding as if this was simple news, asking when she would leave, and she said 2 weeks, just 2 weeks. As if time could be folded neatly and packed into a suitcase. The cafe sounds faded into the background as Daniel tried to process what that meant, remembering how their connection had grown without plans, without promises, just shared conversations that slowly built trust, and now he realized how much those talks had meant to him, how much he had counted on seeing her every week, how her presence had filled a quiet space in his life he hadn't even known was empty. Emily watched him carefully, as if searching his face for something, disappointment, anger, or maybe a reason to change her mind, but he gave her none of that because he believed love should never feel like a cage, and even though they had never defined what they were, the silence between them carried emotion that neither could deny. She explained how the offer was bigger than anything she had expected, a step forward in her career, a chance to lead her own team, a fresh start in a new city. And he listened, truly listened, because he respected her ambition, because he admired the courage it took to leave comfort behind, yet every word felt like a countdown. He wanted to say stay, wanted to confess that these Thursdays had become the highlight of his week, that he checked the clock every Wednesday night already thinking about seeing her, but fear held him back, not fear of rejection, but fear of being selfish, of asking her to shrink her world just to fit beside his. Emily admitted she had almost turned it down, and that startled him, because he never wanted to be the reason she hesitated over something so important, and when he asked why, she hesitated before answering, because of here, her eyes flicking up to meet his, and he knew she didn't just mean the cafe. The air between them felt fragile, like thin glass that could crack if handled wrong. And Daniel realized that the undefined space they had lived in, comfortable, safe, unnamed, was no longer enough, because distance forces clarity. He asked if she was excited, and she nodded, but there was sadness behind it, a quiet grief for something unfinished, and he understood that sometimes two people can care deeply for each other yet still stand at different crossroads. Outside, cars passed through puddles, splashing reflections across the pavement, while inside the cafe their world felt suspended, as if time had paused to watch what they would do next. He thought about all the moments they had shared, the laughter over bad office stories, the way she teased him about always ordering the same drink, the softness in her voice when she spoke about her dreams, and he realized that what they had built was real, even without labels, even without grand declarations. Emily leaned forward slightly and asked him what he was thinking, and he chose honesty without drama, telling her he was proud of her, that she should go, that opportunities like this do not come twice, and though his heart resisted the words, he meant them. She studied him, perhaps hoping he would fight harder, perhaps relieved that he understood, and that unspoken tension revealed the truth. They both cared, but neither wanted to hold the other back. She confessed she was scared of starting over in a new country, scared of feeling alone in a big city, and Daniel felt a strong urge to promise he would visit, to promise something solid, yet he knew promises made in emotional moments can become heavy later, so instead he told her she was braver than she believed, that she would build something beautiful there just like she had built something meaningful here. The conversation moved quickly after that, practical details replacing emotional ones, as if both of them were trying to protect themselves from the weight of goodbye, but beneath every sentence lay the same question neither dared to ask directly: what are we going to do about us? The truth was simple and complicated at the same time. They had never crossed clear lines, never rushed into a title, yet their bond was deeper than casual friendship, and now distance would test whether that connection could survive without the comfort of shared space. When the barista refilled their cups, Daniel realized this might be one of the last ordinary Thursdays they would have, and the thought made the room feel smaller. Emily reached across the table briefly, her fingers brushing his hand in a quiet gesture that spoke more than words, and in that touch he felt everything: gratitude, affection, regret, possibility. And he understood that sometimes love is not about dramatic speeches or bold gestures, but about choosing what is right even when it hurts. As the evening continued, they both smiled more than they felt, trying to hold on to the warmth of the moment rather than the shadow of the future. Yet deep down Daniel knew that the next 2 weeks would pass faster than he was ready for, and when she finally stood to leave that night, promising they would talk again soon, he watched her walk out into the rain with a calm expression that hid the storm inside him, aware that their quiet, beautiful routine had just been given an ending date, and nothing about Thursday evenings would ever feel the same again. The final Thursday arrived faster than Daniel expected, and from the moment he woke up that morning, he felt the weight of it pressing against his chest. The sky over Seattle was pale and heavy with clouds, as if the city understood what this evening meant, and he moved through his workday distracted, answering emails without reading them twice, checking the clock more than usual, knowing that by 6:15 p.m. something in his life would quietly shift. When he entered the cafe, the familiar bell sounded softer than ever, and he paused for a second before walking to the table by the window, noticing how every detail seemed sharper: the scratch in the wood, the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, the smell of fresh coffee, and he wondered how many times he had sat here without realizing he was building memories that would soon feel distant. He arrived early, not because he needed to, but because he wasn't ready to waste a single minute of the time they had left, and when Emily finally stepped inside, she looked both strong and fragile at the same time, dressed neatly, her hair falling over her shoulders, her expression calm but thoughtful. She smiled when she saw him, and he stood automatically, pulling out her chair as he always did, and for a brief second it felt like any other Thursday, like nothing had changed, but beneath the surface they both knew this was goodbye. They started with small talk, talking about packing boxes, airport times, how her parents were excited for her, how her new apartment overlooked a busy Toronto street, and Daniel listened carefully, memorizing her voice, her gestures, the way she wrapped her hands around her cup when she was thinking. There was no anger, no regret in her tone, only a quiet sadness that matched his own, and after a few minutes of safe conversation, Emily looked at him directly and asked the question that had been waiting between them for weeks: why didn't we ever try? And the words cut through the air with surprising clarity. Daniel didn't answer immediately, because the truth was not simple, and he didn't want to give her a shallow response, so he took a breath and admitted that he had been afraid of ruining what they had, afraid that defining it too quickly might break the comfort they shared, and she nodded slowly, understanding but still searching his face for something more. "And what did we have?" she asked gently, not accusing, just curious, and he felt his chest tighten because he had never said it out loud before, never put language to the connection that had grown between them, so he told her they had peace, that being around her felt easy in a world that often felt complicated, that he looked forward to their talks more than he had realized at first. Her eyes softened, and she admitted that she felt it too, that Thursday evenings had become the best part of her week, that she sometimes chose her outfit carefully without knowing why, that she had replayed their conversations in her mind during long drives home. The honesty between them made the moment heavier but also clearer, and Daniel understood that their bond had always been real, even if it had stayed unnamed. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping against the window in steady rhythm, and he remembered the first night they met under similar weather, how accidental it had seemed, how simple that first question about the empty seat had been. Now everything felt meaningful, as if time had carefully arranged these moments to teach them something about timing and courage. Emily leaned forward slightly and confessed that she had hoped he might ask her to stay, not because she needed permission, but because part of her wanted proof that what they felt was strong enough to fight for, and Daniel's heart ached at her honesty because he had considered it, had imagined telling her not to go, had pictured a future where Toronto was just an idea that faded away, but he knew deep down that love should support growth, not limit it. He told her he didn't want her to look back one day and wonder what might have happened if she had taken the job, and she listened quietly, understanding that his silence had not come from lack of feeling but from respect. The cafe lights reflected softly in her eyes, and for a moment neither of them spoke, letting the weight of their choices settle between them. When the barista announced closing time was approaching, Daniel realized how quickly 2 hours could disappear, and panic flickered briefly inside him because endings always arrive faster than we expect. Emily stood slowly, gathering her coat, and he stood too, unsure whether to hug her or simply say goodbye like they had done every other week. But this was not every other week, and both of them felt it. She stepped closer, and he wrapped his arms around her in a careful, steady embrace that held gratitude, admiration, and quiet love without crossing any boundaries. And in that simple hug he felt everything they had shared, the laughter, the late conversations, the silent understanding. When they pulled apart, her eyes were bright but determined, and she thanked him for being her calm place during a confusing season of her life, and he thanked her for reminding him that connection can appear when you least expect it. As she walked toward the door, she turned back once more, memorizing him the way he was memorizing her, and then she stepped out into the rain, disappearing into the gray Seattle evening. Daniel remained inside for a moment longer, staring at the door, knowing that something beautiful had ended not because it failed, but because life had pulled them in different directions. He finally left the cafe, hands in his pockets, the cool air hitting his face, and as he walked home through wet streets glowing under streetlights, he understood that some relationships are not meant to last forever in form, but they leave a permanent mark in feeling. And though he had chosen not to stop her, not to ask her to stay, he also knew that what they shared would not fade easily, because the strongest connections are not measured by time, but by the depth they leave behind. Months passed after Emily left for Toronto, and Daniel learned how quiet Thursdays could feel when hope no longer waited across a wooden table. At first he kept himself busy, staying late at work, accepting extra projects, filling his evenings with noise so he would not think about the empty seat by the cafe window. But no matter how full his schedule became, 6:15 p.m. on Thursdays still felt different, like a small echo inside his chest. He stopped going to the cafe because walking in without her felt harder than staying away, and life slowly adjusted to a new rhythm, steady but less bright. And though he followed her new journey through social media, photos of her office view, snapshots of snowy Toronto streets, captions about big meetings and new friends. He kept his reactions simple, never wanting to interrupt the life she was building. He told himself this was what maturity looked like, supporting someone from a distance, accepting that timing had not chosen them. Yet some nights he found himself replaying their last conversation, wondering if silence had cost them something more. Winter came and went, Seattle rain turned to brief sunlight, and Daniel almost convinced himself that their chapter had closed peacefully, until one ordinary evening, while scrolling through his phone without much thought, he saw her name tagged in a post, and his breath paused when he noticed the location beneath it, Seattle, Washington. He stared at the screen to make sure he was not imagining it, reading the tag twice, then 3 times, and a sudden rush of emotion broke through the calm he had carefully built. He did not message her immediately, did not ask questions, but something inside him awakened, something that had been quiet but never gone. The next Thursday arrived, and without planning it too much, Daniel left work early and found himself walking toward the cafe he had avoided for months, his steps quick but uncertain, wondering if he was chasing memory instead of reality. When he opened the door, the bell sounded the same as always, and the smell of coffee wrapped around him like a familiar song, and for a second he stood still, letting the past and present blend together. He walked to the table by the window, half expecting it to feel foreign, yet it felt exactly as it once had, steady and waiting. He checked the time, 6:14 p.m., and his heart beat faster than it had in months. He told himself he might be foolish, that maybe she was only visiting family, that maybe she had no intention of coming here, but hope, once awakened, does not quiet easily. Then the door opened, and the cool evening air swept inside, and there she was. Emily stepped in with the same calm presence, though something about her seemed stronger now, more certain, and when her eyes met his across the room, surprise shifted quickly into a warm, knowing smile. She walked toward him without hesitation, and this time she did not ask if the seat was taken. She simply sat down as if she had never left. For a moment they both laughed softly, not because anything was funny, but because life sometimes moves in ways that feel unreal. He asked when she arrived, and she said earlier that week, explaining that Toronto had given her growth and experience, but also clarity. She spoke honestly, saying that success felt good, that she was proud of what she achieved. Yet every busy day ended with the same quiet thought, that something important had been left unfinished in Seattle. Daniel listened carefully, not wanting to interrupt the courage it took for her to admit that. She told him she realized that strong connections are rare, that building a new life is exciting, but sharing it with the right person matters more than impressive titles. He felt his guarded walls soften, and instead of hiding behind calm words like before, he allowed himself to speak openly, telling her that he had missed her presence, that no amount of work could replace the peace he felt sitting across from her. There was no drama, no desperate promises, only clear honesty between two people who had grown enough to understand what they valued. She explained that she had requested a transfer within her company, that Seattle now offered opportunities too, and that this time she was not choosing between ambition and connection, but finding a way to balance both. Daniel felt a quiet relief spread through him, not because circumstances had magically solved everything, but because they were finally choosing with courage instead of fear. Outside the window, the evening sky shifted from gray to soft blue, and the rain that once symbolized goodbye now felt like renewal. He reached across the table, slowly, giving her space to pull back if she needed to, but she did not hesitate. Their hands met in a simple, steady touch that carried months of distance, reflection, and quiet longing. In that moment, there were no grand speeches, only understanding, that sometimes timing tests people not to separate them, but to help them return stronger. The cafe buzzed softly around them, unaware that something meaningful had just restarted at a small table by the window. Daniel realized that love does not always need dramatic beginnings or painful endings. Sometimes it needs patience, growth, and the bravery to try again. As they began talking about ordinary things, the new projects she would handle in Seattle, the places they wanted To explore together, the simple joy of not counting down to goodbye. He felt something settle inside him, something calm and hopeful. This time there was no silent fear of what might happen, no hesitation about defining what they were. They had learned from distance, and distance had given them clarity, and as the cafe lights glowed warmly against the evening sky, Daniel understood that some connections do not disappear when separated by miles, they wait quietly for the right moment to return. Stronger, steadier, and finally ready to begin.